Okay, Jason, explain this a little better. I drew the exact wiring diagram you have. So this is the brown wire. This is the plug. This is violet going to the regulator and to the starter solenoid on the hot side. This one is the blue wire going to the diode. The diode feeds this way, not backwards. Number 5, which is 5 there, but that 5 I'll explain later. This wire is on the other side of the diode, and it's red. It goes to the throttle solenoid, or not throttle solenoid, I'm sorry. It goes to the fuel shutoff solenoid. And then it goes over to the oil pressure switch, which is still red. And then you have wire number 1 off your run going into the plug, into a yellow wire, which goes to the other side of the oil pressure switch. The ground here, you don't have to run through the plug. You could just take it right there, put a terminal on it, and screw it into the chassis of the welder. On the engine side, you can take a wire from the engine block, bolt it in, and screw it into the chassis. That's all the grounds you need. All of these grounds here, they get a ground through the block of the engine. And of course this one is bolted to the block and to the chassis because it's the battery. That's all the grounds you need. So to explain this plug here, you have 6 positions that you can plug wires into, and they're notated on the plug. You can actually see the wire numbers. See if I can show this to you. If it focuses a little bit. Can't get it to quite focus. But at any rate, it starts out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the numbers here correspond to the location on this plug. So you have 1, 3, 5, 6, 2. So you got that? So one side of this plug, this side is PLG4. All of those are PLG4. This side. I actually had that backwards. This side is PLG4. This side is RC4. So that explains all these designations right here and the numbers in between the arrow and the backwards arrow. So it's the same on this plug. They're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know if you can see it or not, but they are numbered. So that's the locations of the wires that go in the plug. This one is shown on the back of the start switch. So one side plugs into the start switch, which is this side here. So it's showing the back side of it. Just like that. So you know what locations to plug the wires into the start switch. So you have the start, number 5, goes in the top, very top one there. The battery goes in the next one, just below it. So you have start, you have battery right here. You have run idle right here. And then you have run. So that should clear up that. So you have a battery feeding a fuse going to wire number 6, which you follow the schematic, go up, it goes to number 6 here, into the battery terminal for the starter switch. So when you turn the starter switch to the start position, then you're feeding voltage to this wire, this terminal, and this terminal. So you got start, going back down here, you got it to number 5, wire 5. It goes into your coil of your starter ignition, or not ignition, but solenoid, starter solenoid. And it goes to ground here. So what it's doing, it's completing a circuit. The solenoid is pulling in, completing a circuit between here and here. This goes to ground, or this goes to the motor itself. Not to ground. It has to go through the motor and into ground. So it's completing the circuit between these two. So you got power, you're energizing the motor of the starter. So also what is happening, you're feeding voltage from wire 5 still through the diode. And it's going down to the fuel solenoid, fuel shutoff solenoid, and opening it to let fuel go through the carburetor. But it's also going here to wire 20, which is feeding your circuitry for your armature here, your revolving armature. So these represent the brushes This is a plug that these wires plug into. So it goes through wire 20, through D4, and goes up here and out, feeding the armature back to ground, which is wire 33. But it also goes through and powers the hour meter going to ground, but it also comes back down here and goes across to the oil pressure switch. So one side of the oil pressure switch, when you have the engine in the mode we have it now, it's the start mode. You have power coming through here, up to here. When this oil pressure switch closes, makes contact between these two, then your run actually takes over and feeds power back to here. When you release the start switch, it's going into the run mode. You have power, so the oil pressure switch has completed the circuit. You have oil pressure, goes back up here and feeds wire 20 again, goes back up. Voltage cannot go this way because the diode is blocking it. So the only place it can go from run is through here, the oil pressure switch, back over, feeding the fuel solenoid, keeping it open, and feeding power back to the armature brushes and everything. So this should explain a lot of your confusion. And here you have, yes, wire 7 on idle. And the only time this is going to be energized is when you turn the switch to run idle. And you have power here. You also have power on run. So it goes and feeds the idle board, and then it goes into idle mode, which energizes the throttle solenoid until you strike an arc or you turn a grinder on. Then it flips and releases this solenoid, and then it times out if you stop the arc, and then it pulls this solenoid back in. So E is a ground. This is power coming from the switch. This is your power out going to your throttle solenoid. And this is the sensing mechanism that tells this board what to do. It goes over here. I don't have it drawn, but there's a circuit that senses amperage, and it turns this on. So just know that it all starts here on wire 6 from the battery, going right there, jumps over when you start it, comes back through 5, goes over, feeds wire 20, feeds the throttle solenoid. When you have oil pressure, this closes. You release the switch to run, and then it comes back this way, not that way, and goes up, feeds 20 and the throttle or the fuel shutoff solenoid. So there's 2 circuits, actually 3, that this controls: the start, the run, and the run idle. And your legend here shows everything. Switch is off, you have nothing. When you go into start, the start is working. That's energized. When you release the switch, you have it in run, idle, run, and start. When you release the switch, it goes into this one, or if you turn the switch, it goes into this one, which is idle. And notice that there's no X here for idle, but there is in idle mode. So it's feeding power to the board there. This one, it has power in all three, depending on where you have the switch. This one, it only has power in the start. So this is a legend for this switch right here. I hope this explains it a little better to you. So what you have to do, you have to marry the solenoid into that engine. You have to marry the starter from your external starter solenoid. You have battery power going here. You have voltage from the regulator. And then you have to the start motor. And this case is grounded. And then this is from the switch to start the engine. To close these two terminals, the solenoid has to lock into these two, close the circuit to feed power into the start motor. That's when you turn the switch on to start. Okay?